Shalom Aleichem. Today is Yom Hamishi B'Shabbat Yod Aleph L'man Heshwan Tavshin Peh He, corresponding to the 12th of December 2024, L'minyan Ha'omoth. We are in Hilchot Avoda Zarah V'Hukot HaGoyim Perek Yod, and we are now looking at Halacha Gimel or Halacha Beth in some editions. What we saw, let's recap briefly what we saw in the previous shiur. We saw that this perek begins with the words En korathim berith le'ovdei avoda zarah. Not any other girasa reading that you may find in certain editions, almost all of which were heavily censored. And the more time went on, the more recent the printing, the more censored it was. So this perek is referring to, as the name of these halachot implies, this perek refers to Avoda Zarah. It doesn't specify any particular nation or any particular religion. So first of all, this already, that those words, that we should not make peace with them and allow them to live with us and live amongst us, this already makes clear that we are discussing a normative reality. That is to say, when Am Yisrael is in Eretz Yisrael and is able to determine its destiny and make the rules, as it were. Excuse me. That's number one. We also touched upon the halacha of Toshe Bagim Harog B'Sha'at Milchama, which Rambam hints at in passing at the end of halacha Aleph, when he says Aval la'bado biyado ol'dachvo levor, speaking about such a person whose life is in danger. Asur mipaneh sheno oseh imanu milchama. And michlal lo ata shomea hen. Right? It's quite obvious. The implication is plain. That if this person and his ethnic group, his nation, his tribe is in a state of war with us, then the halacha is that we are interested in his demise and not simply going to adopt the position of shev wal ta'aseh adif. And we saw in halacha beth that this refers to a goy. Aval mosrei Yisrael v'haminim v'apikorosim miswa la'abodan bayad. In other words, the threat to Am Yisrael is greater from such people than from goyim over the Avoda Zarah. And therefore there is a miswa la'abodan bayad when we are in a position to do so. Ulehoridam ad be'er shahat mipnei shehem nesirim liYisrael umesirim et ha'am me'acharei Hashem kiyeshua hanosri v'talmido v'sadok u'vaitos v'talmidahem shem r'sha'im yirkav. So much for Rabbeinu Rambam being a great humanist. This, of course, is a direct quote from Baraitoth Mefurashot in Chazal, such as in Avoda Zarah and the Bavli of Kafwell, and many other places. So beware of great Torah luminaries, such as the President of Israel, for example, or for that matter, all kinds of rabbis as well, and unfortunately even certain rabbis that are labeled Orthodox, who will speak to you about Jewish values and somehow their views do not seem to stack up with this these notions and stipulations that we see here. In general, the less a person is involved in the Torah and studies the Torah and knows of the Torah, the more such people proclaim themselves to be experts on Torah Judaism. That is usually how things work. There is a point that I wanted to mention here. I'm not going to go into all the sources now, but there are sources for this, and I will quote them separately in another shield. And that is, as we see here in this halakha refers to Mosarim. Obviously, Mosarim are a great threat to Am Yisrael for obvious reasons. They can cause both financial loss, and which is also a serious matter, not to mention that they can lead to the imprisonment or the death of a fellow Jew or many Jews. So clearly Mosarim are a threat to the Jewish people, no question. What about Minim and Apikorosim? Rambam defines these terms in Hilchot Teshuvah Perek Shelishi, which we've seen in the past. We can look at again if necessary. Not today, but why are they a threat? They are a threat, as Rambam says here. And if you read carefully the Rambam's wording, you see that there are two statements here, or two categories. You have Mosarei Yisrael, and you have Minim Apikorosim. The Mosarim engage in actual, shall we say, a type of warfare against the Jewish people, shall we say. In other words, they actively pursue they actively seek out ways to bring about harm to the Jewish people or individuals. Minimi Apikorosim may also actively seek to do something along those lines. In other words, they may seek to publish their views, to publicize them, to disseminate them, to convince people of their position. But they may not. Even if they're not doing so, they're still a minim and apikorosim. And by example, by hearing what these people inevitably say and write and teach, even if it's, as it were, without an overtly deliberate campaign to convince others of their views, just by being who they are, they constitute a very serious spiritual threat, not necessarily physical, but spiritual threat for the Jewish people. And you see in the Rambam says about both, Miswa la'abadam bayad, and he goes on to say, Mipane shehen mesarim li Yisrael. This, I think, refers to the Mosarim, right? Lahaser is to cause damage and harm to the Jewish people. That's clearly referring to the Mosarim. Umesirim et ha'am meharei Hashem. That refers to Haminim Apikorosim. By their being, they are a very serious threat and cause tremendous harm to the Jewish people. Ki Yeshua HaNosri v'Tzadok u'Vaithos. We're not aware of Yeshua HaNosri or Tzadok u'Vaithos Shem Rasha'im Yirkav. We are not aware of them engaging in activities that were designed to bring physical harm, such as acts of mesirah. We're not aware of that, but we are aware of their intellectual, ideological, spiritual activities, which cause great harm. So both of these things are a great threat to the Jewish people. And earlier I was discussing with Leon. We touched upon what the Hazon Ish writes in Yorodea, that people who do not know, people who have no understanding because they were brought up in a world where the norm is, or the in thing, the advanced and fashionable position to adopt is an anti-Torah position. Hazon Ish writes, Efshar, it's possible that such people should be viewed more, we should treat them more leniently. And even perhaps not consider, and there the Hazon Ish, as I recall, discusses Maga, Bayayin, etc. So maybe their Maga should not be considered Oser. In other words, the wine touched by such a person should not be considered as wine touched by a goy oved avoda Zarah. And that makes a lot of sense, by the way, because the read already says, Rabbani Yeshaya Detrani already says in a Teshuvah that he doesn't think that the Maga of Nusarim should be Oser wine. Because according to Christianity, only the priest is allowed to deal with such things. Yes, they use wine in their Avoda Zarah, but it's asur for the layman to do so, not as it once was in the ancient world. This is one of the differences, one of the rules that was instituted by Christianity, that certain things can only be done by a qualified, authorized person. And for that reason, he says, a stam goy touching wine should be irrelevant, just as Rambam or the Geonim spoke about Muslims, because they don't touch wine. They're not supposed to use wine at all. And the same is actually true for a Christian. They don't use wine as a private person for Avodah Zarah purposes. They drink wine, but otherwise there's nothing to do with Avodah Zarah. That is a very rational, logical claim, as is what the Hazon Ish writes. On the other hand, and obviously what the Hazon Ish writes is also based on, at least to some extent, what Rambam writes in Hilchot Mamurim Perek Sheni, when he speaks about Kara'im, who are brought up to believe that the Torah Sheba'al Peh is not true, is not, it's a distortion, and it doesn't need to be taken into account, Chas v'Shalom. And he refers to them as people who are Kathi Nokshen Ishba, with a kaf, Kathi Nokshen Ishba, similar to such a person who was kidnapped as a babe and brought up as a non-Jew and didn't even know he was a Jew until much later. Both of these statements, the Rambam and the Hazon Ish, are svarot, first of all. They're not mefurash. They're a svara, but they're very reasonable and logical svara. However, when it comes to people who actively wage war against the Jewish people's civilization and culture and way of life, in other words, against the Torah, they go out of their way to do so. It's not just that they themselves don't live that way, which today, unfortunately, we are all so used to, that yes, you can make the argument quite reasonably that one more person like that, it doesn't make a difference, because unfortunately the entire world has been contaminated by such views. But people who actively fight against the Jewish people, their Torah and their way of life, and actively and very deliberately try to distance Jews from Avihem Shebashamayim, seems to me that is a different category. There we are. War is being waged against us, both as a kalal and as individuals, and we should be allowed to defend ourselves. It makes sense. It's reasonable, seems to me, to say that. That is with regards to what we saw last week. So we've just expanded a little bit and expounded a little bit on what we saw last week. Now we can move on to Halacha Gimel or Halacha Beth in some editions, which says as follows: Mikan ata lamed. So based on what we saw before, that we are not allowed to merahem. We learned in Halacha Aleph, wa'asulu rahem alehem, shene'emar lo v'lo tehonem. Therefore, one aspect, one expression of rahamim, or being concerned for their welfare, or assisting them, or saving them from death, or what have you, has to do also with with medical treatment, for obvious reasons. So therefore Rambam says, Mikan ata lamed, asur l'rapoth avoda Zarah, afilu b'sachar. So, if you're not allowed to save this person's life if he happens to have tripped and fallen into the river, why should you be allowed to save his life by sharing with him your medical expertise? Or just, patching up a wound or something that he has so it doesn't become infected. And even wafilo b'sachar, it should be asur. And it is asur. And this again, this is not a hidush of the Rambam. This is all explicitly mentioned by Hadar. However, if the Jew is in a situation where he has good reason to be concerned and to believe that they will deal with him harshly or attack him or harm him or other Jews if he is seen to refuse to help them in such ways, or shayah hoshesh mishum eva. Eva is hostility. In other words, if he feels that by causing the level of hostility between the Jewish and non-Jewish population to rise, and who knows exactly how that will pan out. Therefore, in that case, marapeh b'sachar, it is mutar to do so as a doctor does. In other words, it's his parnasa, it's his livelihood, and it's normal to charge for such services. Aval b'hinam asur, but to do so b'hinam is not allowed. V'gher toshav. Now, what about a person who is a ger toshav? In other words, he's a goy, but he's not an avoda Zarah. He does not worship any foreign god. He does not believe in any foreign religion. He is an ideal ben Noach. He keeps the Sheva Mitzvot ben Noach, and he even came before a Beth Din and declared as much. And such a person, Bezman Shayovel Noher, as we shall see, is even allowed to reside in Eretz Yisrael if Am Yisrael finds this to be the correct and desirable policy. It's not that we are required to do so, but it's possible. Seeing that we learn from various statements in the Torah, and Chazal expound on these things, that a ger toshav, if let's say he's starving, we are required to give him tzedakah, to keep body and soul together. If seeing that is the case, clearly also offering them medical assistance is also is correct and necessary. There is also much to be discussed with regards to this statement or this concept of a ger toshav, and whether it applies to Muslims, for example. There were poskim who were of the opinion that seeing that Islam does not involve bowing down to idols, which it does not, that is true, unless we're talking about very specific sects or types or religions or sects related to or connected in some way to Islam, but not standard mainstream Islam, which is very much opposed to idols of all kind. Therefore, they're not considered Avoda Zarah, and therefore they are considered the ger toshav. There are many sources on this subject. I won't go into them now. Perhaps we'll devote a shiur to this. But the bottom line is this is a completely mistaken and perverse view. And it is also, not surprisingly, based on heavy censorship of the sources. For example, if you take what the Bah writes on this in Yoreh De'ah, and when you compare the original version or the more recently printed versions to the versions that were before most of the poskim for the last few centuries, then you discover that interestingly enough, 50% of what the Bach wrote on the subject is excised, is not there. So the Bach says, well, you could say such and such, and then he goes on to explain why you can't say that, why that's completely mistaken, but the second half is just not there, so you can easily be misled, and many were misled. Hagaon Hazonish Zatzal was not misled, even though I do not think that he saw an uncensored version, but he understood and saw through the smokescreen, which is a sign of a great Chacham. And he writes explicitly that only a person who rejects all foreign religions, all other systems, and believes and accepts that the Torah is from Hashem and is Torat Emeth, and that Jews are required to follow all of the Torah and to keep Taryag Mitzvot, and B'nai Noach to follow and live by the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. Only such a person can possibly qualify as a Ger Toshav. Any other system which denies the essential truth and primacy of the Torah cannot be considered a Ger Toshav. And again, the reason is very obvious. If we said in the previous halacha that minim and apikorosim mesirim et ha'am meharei Hashem, that they distance people and lead them astray, distance them from Hashem and lead them astray and away from the Torah. Well, clearly, any other ideology that claims something similar, in other words, that this is not necessarily true, or definitely not true, well, they're doing the same thing exactly. What's the difference, therefore, between a person who holds by this or that religion or system and these minim and apikorosi mentioned over here? There is no difference. One cannot possibly make such an argument. All right, we continue. We said in Halacha Aleph, Lo Tehonem, V'lo Tehonem, says the Torah. Do not treat them kindly, and do not allow any place in your heart for being compassionate, etc., towards them, or helping them out in any way. And therefore, included in this Isur is as follows: Halacha Dalet or Gimel in some versions, En mocherim lahem batim usadot v'eretz Yisrael. First of all, again, this perek in the first place is talking about Jews living in Eretz Yisrael at a time when they are again in control of their lives and of what goes on in general. And therefore, in Eretz Yisrael, we are not allowed to sell houses, real estate, land, fields to any such person. In other words, to any Avoda Zarah, or as we've just explained, any person who follows any foreign ideological, theological system. So it doesn't matter really whether we're talking about a Nosri or a Muslimi or a Buddhist or a Baha'i or a Hindu, whatever it might be. It's not a racial. The distinction is not based on race at all. It is based entirely on ideology and theology. In other words, the essential philosophy and conception of human existence that underpins everything they think and say and do. It goes without saying that to sell real estate, homes, houses, warehouses, fields, etc., to people who claim that this is their land and not the land promised by Hashem to the Jewish people, and is their inalienable, everlasting right and birthright, it goes without saying that is not a possibility either. And it actually flows from what we said before, because if a person is a true Ger Toshav, a true Ben Noach, the difference between a Ben Noach and a Ger Toshav is really the declaration before a Beit Din and receiving a certain official status as a Ger Toshav. But the belief system and the ideology can be identical. If a person is a true Ger Toshav, then obviously they cannot believe that Eretz Yisrael could belong to anybody else. And they certainly themselves would not make such a claim. So the very claim, if a person says this is my land and not your land, or it belongs to both of us, either of those statements is a clear contravention and denial of what the Torah states clearly 100 times. The entire Torah is predicated on that basic fact and reality that Eretz Yisrael and the Torah, which go together, were given exclusively to the Jewish people, either those who were born Jewish or those who wish to convert to Judaism, and is not for others. That is why it is Goy she'asak b'Torah hayav mitha. That is why studying Torah is not for other people, and that refers specifically to the Torah Sheba'al Peh. The word esek, she'asak b'Torah, the word esek refers to Torah Sheba'al Peh. The nusach of the Ashkenazim in Birkat Torah, as we know, is la'asok b'divrei Torah, not al divrei Torah. Apparently, the more authentic and original nusach is al divrei Torah. This is how it appears in all reliable sources, manuscripts, etc., of the Talmud Bavli. But it is also a fact that some Rishonim, such as the Rosh, write explicitly that the nusach of the Ashkenazim is la'asok b'divrei Torah. So where the nusach came from, we do not know. I certainly do not know for a fact. But it's clear that this was the accepted nusach amongst the Ashkenazim going back, let's say, 1,000 years or 800 years or something like that. And the Maharal explains that la'asok b'divrei Torah has to do with the word esek. La'asok has to do with that which is the essential part of studying the Torah Sheba'al Peh. The Tanakh can be learnt, of course, on different levels. B'kiyuth, in other words, more superficially, or bi'iyun, more in greater depth. One can investigate all many aspects of and things in the Tanakh or that relate to what's written there, so we understand the context, we understand the historical reality, we understand the import of the various things that we study there. But the Torah Sheba'al Peh, in other words, the Mishneh, the Talmud, requires in-depth intellectual effort, more obviously than studying the Tanakh. You cannot just read the Mishnah. You have to, in the case of the Mikra, there's even a mitzvah just to read the words of the Mikra without understanding it too terribly much. But there is no mitzvah to study the Mishnah without understanding what the Mishnah is saying. And that is the esek. That is trying to delve into it and understand what it's getting at and what the implications of that are. That is esek b'Torah. So when Chazal say in Masechet Sanhedrin, "Goy she'asak b'Torah hayav mitah," it is correct to understand that it's referring, certainly for the most part, to Torah Sheba'al Peh. We mentioned that in passing, but the overall point here is that the Torah, the Eretz Yisrael, are Morasha Chihilat Yaakov. They are an inheritance of the Jewish people and only of the Jewish people. So when it comes to Eretz Yisrael, as we see here, En Mucharim Lahen Batim Usadot B'Eretz Yisrael. That's just Asur, Pashut. It's Isur Min HaTorah. Ubesuria, which is those areas that are known as Aram Naharaim, when David HaMelech and his armies conquered the Aramim at that time. Interestingly, that refers to areas that till very recently were referred to as Syria. which is why it says here Surya in the Rambam. So the late state of Syria, Zichrona Livracha, was conquered, or much of it was conquered by David HaMelech over 3,000 years ago. But for certain reasons that we won't go into right now, they have a slightly lower status than other parts of Eretz Yisrael for certain purposes. So, and this is one example. It says, "Ubesuria mochorim lehen batim avalo sadoth." There you're allowed to sell a home to other people, to non-Jews, or to a person who's not a ger toshav, but not sadoth, because fields, agricultural land, are a means of sustenance, a way of, and therefore, without that, you cannot really survive there for any great length of time. Whereas a bait, a home, a house is something more temporary. Eventually, if they have no means of sustenance, of livelihood, that will pack up and leave. Umaskirim lahem batim b'Eretz Yisrael. We are allowed to let, or some people mistakenly refer to as to rent, but it's the other way around. The person who owns it is lets, and the person who pays for it is renting. It is mutar to let a home, a dwelling in Eretz Yisrael over there with the Zarah, Goyim, etc., who are not kasherim, not v'lo b'nei noach, u'vilevad shelo ya'asem shechuna. But you're not allowed to create a certain area, a town, a suburb, where they are the majority. Because that can and almost certainly will lead to trouble and strife. And for example, excuse me, as Paro says at the beginning of Sefer Shemot, if our enemies attack us, perhaps these Hebrews, these Ivrim, perhaps these Ivrim will join forces with them, and we shall be driven out of the land. In other words, we have to worry about a fifth column, or collaborators, etc., etc. So 3 houses together is already considered a shechuna. For the reasons that we explained before. In Eretz Yisrael, you do not even let or lease land to them. But in Surya, one is allowed to. These are essentially hanahoth. These are essentially concessions made to a Jew living in these areas who also has to survive, and maybe he needs to sell. He needs to sell a home, or he needs to lease a field to one of these people in Surya. And if we do not allow him to do so, it may be that he himself will have to pack up and leave, and then we're just shooting ourselves in the foot. We wish Jews to remain in that area and maintain the Jewish presence there, and for that reason we allow these activities. The reasons for being more mahmir when it comes to land rather than a home, a house, there are 2 aspects. First of all, the goy will not be mafrish turumot ma'asroth, tithes from what he may grow there. And you are facilitating their settling down in the land. Rambam continues, as we said, all of this perek lechatchila is talking about Eretz Yisrael, which is the normal state of affairs. However, what about in Chutz La'aretz? The Jew owns a field in France. What is the halacha? Can you sell it to a non-Jew? ומותר למכור להם בתים ושדות בחוץ לארץ, מפני שאינו ארצנו. We are not responsible for everything that goes on in the entire world at all times. When we are in a situation and we can enforce the law, as it were, then we are responsible. But that's not discussed here. That's discussed in Hilchot Melachim u'Milhamot, because that involves Melachim u'Milhamot. In other words, you have to have independent, sovereign Jewish rule and an army, and you have to be in a position where you can apply force where necessary to achieve certain ends. That's not going to be the case for a Jew living in, shall we say, in Rashi's time in France, or a Jew living today in New Jersey. That's not going to be the case. So it's not arseno. We are therefore not overly concerned. We cannot focus on such things, and that's not our responsibility. We have other things to be concerned about when living in Chutz La'aretz amongst Goyim, such as keeping distant from them and maintaining our identity. And there we are allowed to sell property, including fields, land to, in other words, agricultural land, to other people. אף במקום שהתירו להשכיר, לא לבית דירה התירו, מפני שהוא מכניס לתוכה עבודה זרה. However, you should know, says Rambam, even when we said it's mutar to let a property, a home, to such a person, it is not for the purpose that he lives there. Why? Because we can assume, again, this was the assumption, and was a realistic assumption, מפני שהוא מכניס לתוכה עבודה זרה. So you are allowing someone to introduce into a home that essentially belongs to you. You may be leasing it to someone else for a period, but it's yours, and you're allowing it to become a site of Avoda Zarah. That's asur. But you may sell such a warehouse, shall we say, that's an usar, a warehouse or some kind of commercial property, where there is unlikely to be Avodah Zarah. Again, this is based on the reality that in those days, and not just in those days, even down to the present day in many countries and many cultures, certain representations of the Avodah Zarah are normally to be found in the home, on the wall, various statues, idols, images, paintings, crosses, etc., etc. We said before that we do not sell land, why is a sadeh, field, more severe, the halacha, than with regards to a home? We said in the previous halacha, and here also we see that we do not sell even the crop in a field. You can sell the crop that's in a field waiting to be harvested without selling the field. That's called imkor perot utvua b'chayotze ben b'machubar lakarka, when it is still connected. In other words, it has not been harvested, still part of the land. But we don't do that because it's mafkia min ma'asroth. Aval mocher hu mishi akos, or mocher lo al manat lakos v'choses. But you're allowed to sell after it's been harvested. ומפני מה אין מוכרים להם משום שנאמר ולא תחונם, as we said before, לא תיתן להם חניה בקרקע. That is a very important aspect of the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. This all, of course, has to do with Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, and there are a number of things. There's Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, there's the question of Turumot Ma'asrot, there is the question of Hanaya B'Karka, of allowing such foreign people who don't belong in Eretz Yisrael, who are not worthy of Eretz Yisrael, to establish themselves in Eretz Yisrael and to benefit from their being here in Eretz Yisrael. What we want them to do is to leave. If we're not able to do so by force, by fiat, then at least we must encourage them to do so by any means available. That's what this is. All these halachot are about. Of course, there are also, as we said before, there are also aspects of Avoda Zarah, of not allowing Avoda Zarah to take root in Eretz Yisrael, etc. So all this is asur, mishum shene'emar v'lo tehonem, lo titan lahem hanaya b'karka. She'im lo yeh lahem karka, yeshivathan, yeshivat arahi, as we just explained. If you make it difficult and impractical for them to remain here and to establish themselves and their families and their tribes, etc., here in Eretz Yisrael, they will go elsewhere, hopefully. That at least is our ambition, that is our desire, that is our aspiration. So, we shall stop here for today. Hiyu beruchim, hizku v'yamas levavchem, kol hameyahalim al Adonai, shalom v'nisahon al kol oyevenu, mibayith u'mihutz. Peace and victory over all our enemies, foreign and domestic, to quote the American usage. David Melech Yisrael Hai v'Kayam. Shalom.